Wives, how can you live by this hard teaching? Especially when your husband has made it difficult for you. How can you submit to a man who doesn't love you the way Christ loved the church? And by the way, it's impossible for him to do that outside the grace of the gospel. If you view your husband as someone who has the power within himself outside of Jesus to do this, it's impossible. If your husband has to be perfect, it's impossible. It's an impossible teaching. And so wives, how are you to respect a man who is not respectable, who fails, and he will fail? I know I fail every day of every week, of every month, of every year. I fail. How is my wife supposed to respect me in those low, low moments? Wives, how are you supposed to do that? Well, the rest of Ephesians is the key. We're not going to go through every single part of Ephesians, but I want to give you a breakdown. You see, what we like to do in the church is we sometimes like to get right to what theologians call the imperative teaching. Imperative examples are such like, thou shalt. The 10 Commandments are imperatives. They are commands. When Jesus tells us to love our neighbor, when he tells us to love our enemies, that is a command. It's not just a descriptive statement. It's a command. You must do this. So husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. There's no negotiation. Wives, submit to your husbands. There's no negotiation. That's called an imperative. But see, what Ephesians tells us in Ephesians chapter 1 and Ephesians chapter 2 and Ephesians chapter 3 and Ephesians chapter 4, before it ever gets to Ephesians chapter 5, it has something in there that we like to call as theologians indicatives. Indicatives are descriptive. They are factual pieces of information. And what Paul does is he starts off the entire book of Ephesians with the greatness of God choosing you, the greatness of God the Father predestining us to be adopted as sons and daughters by grace alone. In Ephesians chapter 2 lies some of the Christians' favorite verses, that we were saved by grace through faith, and this is the gift of God, not by works, so that no man should boast. How many of you love that verse? How many of you have had that tattooed on your body somewhere? Ephesians 2, 8 through 10, but it doesn't stop there. It doesn't just tell us, hey, you were saved by grace. It says you were saved by grace through faith so that you could do what God has called you to do, so that you have the power by the Holy Spirit, by a work of grace of the Holy Spirit in your life, to be able to submit yourselves to God first, to your husband second, and respect him even when he's not respectable. You see, if you're viewing everything through the lens of the cross and of the gospel, you see, women, that I was saved by grace. I am filthy, rotten sinner outside of Jesus. And Jesus didn't put a bunch of qualifications on his grace and on saving me. No, when we nailed him to the cross, when the soldiers were driving nails into his hands and to his feet as he was stripped naked, put on a bloody, splintering, disgusting, shameful cross, what did he say? Father, forgive them. He didn't say to you women, Father, forgive them if they X, Y, and Z. He didn't qualify it. And so, girls, when you're having trouble submitting to a man who is sinful and submitting to this hard teaching, you must view that situation through the eyes of the cross and the way Jesus has viewed you. Through grace. And realizing that Ephesians just doesn't start off with submit to your husbands. It says, therefore, submit to your husbands. Therefore, in light of the fact that God has chosen you. Therefore, in light of the fact that God has saved you. Therefore, in light of the fact that God has cut out this path for you, this marriage for you. You see, he had this man chosen for you. He designed this man for you. He designed this marriage for you. He guided your footsteps to that altar to take those vows with that man. That's what it means when Paul says he prepared good works in advance for you. And now because God has chosen you, now because Jesus has saved you, now that you understand there's a sanctifying work that's to be done, submit to your husbands. Respect your husbands. in light of the gospel and what it teaches.